Weight management. Now, that kind of parlays right into nutrition because what you eat determines what you fuel your body with. So what we need to go through is figure out, when is it too much? When is it not enough? How do you figure out what is the right amount to eat? Now, when we start looking at weight management, a term that gets used is obesogenic. Now, obesogenic is defined by the CDC as an environment that promotes increased food intake, non-healthy foods, and physical inactivity. Now, if you break that down, all three of those are not great. Increased food intake, excess storage is not great. Non-healthy foods, empty calories, again, not what you want. And physical inactivity means you're not helping utilize your body and keep things moving. So you gotta figure out, how do you combat that? How do you help yourself to not fall into that category? Because back in 2009, the CDC put out a report saying that roughly 1/3 of all US adults are categorized as obese. And unfortunately, that number only has risen since that point. So why is it a concern? Why do we even care? Well, there's numerous health consequences that go along with obesity. Probably one of the biggest ones is going to be cardiovascular disease. You have probabilities of type 2 diabetes. Some cancers come into play from obesity. And the list keeps going on and on. The idea is, by being obese, unfortunately, it gets more of a likelihood to go into these different disorders. Plus, the actual medical costs are on average higher for someone with obesity than not, because as more complications, more problems arise they have to deal with. Now, if you're saying, it's not a big deal, no worries, I know so-and-so that is. Well, a lot of times, obesity takes years to manifest what the actual disorders will be. So a lot of these will happen years after the individual has started being at that point. So it's a kind of a compounding effect, which also means on the good side, you can reverse that and start reversing the obesity by trying to make changes in your life. So what are the obesogenic agents? Now, obesogenic agents are anything that contributes to increased food intake, non-healthy foods, or inactivity. And usually it's more than one adding together, because each one has a small effect. But you start putting 2, 3, 4, 5 things together, it all starts adding up very quickly. So one of the biggest obesogenic agents are fast food restaurants. Now, fast food restaurants, they're convenient, they're fast, that's the whole point. But the actual food is the concern. So take McDonald's, for example, just to get an idea of how prevalent they become in our lives. Back in 1955 is when McDonald's was founded, one place. Today, there's more than 13,000 McDonald's across the US alone, not counting globally. And that's not even the biggest one. There are other, even larger fast food chains. But you have all these different fast food chains, Burger King, Starbucks, you add in Subway in there. You add in, there's tons of them. Like, the list can go on and on and on. Anytime you go near a city or a town, any city town, you have fast food restaurants there. So why is this a concern? Well, do you ever look at the actual menu items, caloric intake, and nutritional information? A lot of times, one meal at a fast food restaurant could be more than half your caloric intake, if not your entire caloric intake, depending on what you order, for the entire day, not meal, day. But that's not getting the nutrients. Now, on the flip side though, it is good that there has been change in recent years. Some of the fast food restaurants have tried to have healthier options on the menu. There's been an increase in salads and fruits. But that comes down to choices then. What do you choose to order at these fast food restaurants? Another obesogenic agent is going to be bigger food portions. Now, this is happening clear across the board, But one example is the bagel. Back around 1960, the bagel was about 3 inches, about half the size of today's bagels, which means since then, they've doubled in size and doubled in calories. Is that necessary? Not really, but that's what's happened. And that happens for so many different things. You can look at drink sizes, and if you go out to the store and buy a drink, the bottle's physically larger, the cans are larger. Everything just is larger than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. So the portions seem to be larger now, and that's taken as the norm. You think it's normal to eat more because that's what the portion sizes are. Depending on what restaurant you go out to eat, sometimes those plates are filled with food. So much so it could fill 2 adults for one single order. So portions have definitely changed over the decades. Another agent, less physical activity. Now with that, thinking about that, okay, let's think of different ways that goes. One way to think about is cars. There are more cars and more people have multiple cars than there were years ago again. Go back decades. Well, if you're saying, well, I have to, I can't get anywhere without it. True. That's because now individuals are also living further away from places of employment and places of where they shop and eat. But even as simply as go to a shopping center, you park in one spot, go to the store. Instead of walking 5 minutes to the next store, you drive the 30 seconds and park again. Another thing that helps add up to less physical activity. Escalators instead of stairs. You can burn quite a few calories, walk up those stairs, but escalators are simpler, they're easier. Now, yes, they have their advantages, I'll give you that. But from an exercise standpoint, that's the question that we're looking at. Or maybe you've seen those horizontal powered people movers. You step on and it just carries you along the hallway. Again, less walking, less exercise. Looking at jobs. There's a lot more factory jobs that are robot-based or mechanical-based than there were manual-based years back. So a lot of jobs now have been basically modernized, industrialized to make it easier for the operator and need fewer operators to do the same task. Which for productivity, that's great. For physical abilities and physical exertion, that's less physical activity. Increase in TVs, tablets, phones, basically screens in general. Now, instead of having maybe that one TV there was decades back, there's 2, 3, 4 TVs in the house potentially. Everyone has their cell phone. There's tablets, there's laptops, there's computers. So tons of entertainment at your fingertips, which kills the boredom, sure. There's less physical activity because you're not outside doing things necessarily as much. So all these can make changes. How many jobs nowadays are you sitting in front of a computer screen? Sit in a chair, computer screen, that's it. There's no need to constantly get up and move. Things have changed. Which instead of having more activity built in the day, you have to have more of a conscious effort to try and get the activity in. And with all this constantly changing and just increasing even more, obesity is not going anywhere. The obesity epidemic will continue unless we personally make changes. So, some personal changes. Well, instead of having as much prepared food, have more self-prepared food. By making it yourself, that helps to have more whole foods and less preservatives in the food. Smaller portions. Make sure your portions are matching your exercise and activity levels. So if you're very active and doing a lot of exercise in a day, portions are larger. You have to replace what you've used. But if your day was very sedentary, had a long work day, and just didn't get a chance to work out or exercise, then maybe a little bit smaller portions. You didn't use as much energy. Walking, biking, exercising in general. Try to increase those amounts on a daily basis. Maybe try to park your car a little bit further away so you're walking a little further to get to where you're going. Take the stairs instead of an elevator or escalator. Just having little things. These little changes can start to make up and add differences. Simply go out and take a walk, explore. What's in your neighborhood? What's around where you work? Just taking that walk and exploring also can help out. And just in general, less TV, more of you up and moving around. These changes could be simple and small. Just pick one. And as that one starts to work in and becomes natural, pick a second one. It doesn't have to be huge, massive changes right away, but small changes. Small little changes can add up and be beneficial. And those changes could simply be education. Just learning about what foods you're eating versus what you should eat versus what you are eating. Maybe they're the same. If they are, great, awesome. Learning about exercise, activity. Learning about realizing how inactive you might be or how active you actually are. Is your job very physically demanding? Maybe you don't need extra exercise. All depends on what you do and how much movement you have. Because as you learn, you're learning about balancing your energy. Balance the intake and the output. If you're trying to maintain where you are, you want to balance, make sure that the energy you put in is equal to the energy you're using in a day. Because if you have a positive energy balance in your cells, that means you take in more than you use. Well, that's for growth. That could be growth of your cells, your tissues, your muscles, or it could be growth of adipose. Depends on how it's being used. Depends on what you did during the day. Were you exercising enough where you needed to build muscle? Or was it sedentary? If your cells are in a negative state of energy, that means you've ingested less energy than you used. In that case, you then burn reserves you have in your body. And it's looking at these positive energy amounts versus negative energy amounts in your cells that are going to be how you alter your body to either gain weight or lose weight. Because both of them have advantages depending on what your goal is. So how do you figure all this out? Well, there is an estimate energy requirement, or EER. Now the formula is kind of complex. Don't memorize it, I don't care about that. But understanding how to use it so you can actually calculate it for yourself, that we need to do. So there's one for male, one for female. The numbers vary because of body composition and ages and sizes. So let's look at the male one just to give a run through. The female is the same thing, just change the numbers. So you have the form factor of 662, so 662. Then subtract off your age bounce. So it's going to be 9.53 times the age in years. Then you'll add that to the PA, or the physical activity factor. We'll get to that in a second. Multiply that by this whole chunk here, which is 15.91 times your weight in kilograms. So if you're looking at it in pounds, it's 2.2 to 1. So you got to work out the factor there. So 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds. And then plus 539.6 times your height in meters. So you got to convert that one through too. 1 inch is 2.54 centimeters. Once you've gone through that, you now have your estimated energy requirement. That's for adults over the age of 18, that is. Now that's a daily requirement. Will it change depending on your physical activity? Sure. That's why we have this physical activity factor. The physical activity factor, sedentary, low, moderate, and high. Sedentary is 0 because you're not doing anything. Low is the equivalent of if you walked 1.5 to 3 miles in a day. Moderate is 3 to 10 miles in a day, and high is 10 plus miles in a day. Now you're saying, well, I don't walk 10 miles a day, but maybe I biked. Well, it depends on how much you biked. This is one of those things where it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly because everyone considers this differently, unless you're using the actual walking as your guide. So once you have it all set, you have your energy requirements. You got to try to figure out what foods you're eating then to balance out your nutrients and your energy. So when you're planning this out, you're looking into the foods, trying to figure out what's going on. For adults over 19, your carbohydrates should be give or take between 45 and 65% of your intake. Your proteins should be between 10 and 35% of your intake. And that leaves fats at 20 to 35% of your intake. Now, will that vary from day to day? Sure. You've got to make sure that you, though, balance out from day to day. Have an idea of what you're doing there. But that needs to be also factored against your total energy expenditure, or your TEE. Now, your total energy expenditure is the amount of activity you have and your basal metabolism. Basal metabolism is going to be the amount of energy your body needs for your metabolism to run if you just functioned on the body. That means not doing anything else. So if you literally sat in a chair all day, what energy you need to keep your body functional. Now, this is where BMR, or basal metabolic rate, comes into play. Because the basal metabolic rate is the amount of energy you'll use to power everything. And this is where most of your body's energy goes. On average, 50 to 70% of your body's energy goes into your basal metabolic rate, just keeping your body functioning and alive. All your organs need energy. But this basal metabolic rate, this BMR, can vary based on several factors. The two largest factors are body size and body composition. Physically larger means more energy is needed. Doesn't matter if it's muscle or fat, just physically larger. So someone that was 6 foot needs more energy than someone that was 5 foot. The other one, body composition. This one takes into account muscle versus fat. Muscle is going to utilize more energy and burn more energy than fat will. So if you had an individual at 200 pounds that was really built with muscle versus 200 pounds of just pure fat because they don't really do anything, the muscle individual would have a higher BMR. Other things also factor in though. Gender. Now, gender for that matter, male versus female, on average, males have more muscle in their systems compared to females. Just a biological fact in that one. Now, are there some females that have more muscle than males? Sure, there's plenty though. But if you average out every female and every male across the world, on average, it falls that way a little bit. Age. Because as you age, your body has different requirements. Nutritional status. Is your body in more of a starved state, you need energy, or do you have more excess energy already? Genetics. Can't change that one, but it's based on how your body runs. Temperature, thyroid. There's tons of factors here. The thyroid is the amount of hormone. Helps control your metabolism. Temperature, a little bit warmer, you run ahead a little faster. A little bit cooler, you usually run a little slower. But an interesting note on here is those organs, that whole genetics we're talking about. Your liver uses the most energy of any one of your organs. So you can see there's quite a few organs that use a decent amount, but when you're at a resting state, the liver is the most. Now sure, if you're in a very high exercise, high aerobic energy state, your muscles would use more. But resting, that's the liver. You then have to take into account the thermic effects of food. Because as you're eating, you also need to then spend energy to break down that food. The absorption through the lining of the intestines. The enzymes that were produced and made to help with the breakdown. All the muscular movement throughout your GI tract. All that needs energy. So roughly on a daily basis, about 10% of your energy goes to this thermic effect of food, of you basically eating food. So really calculating this total energy expenditure, or TEE, isn't super simple because there's a huge variety and a huge variable to what's going on here. Now, the exercising, how do you quantify it? Genetics, how do you know how that plays out into it? But there are calculators on the web that will help with calculating the TEE. Now, if you're using one of these calculators, it'll have a whole series of questions, but I'd say try 2 or 3 ones. See what they all say. See if they agree, or maybe the algorithms come up a little differently. But now that we know about this estimated energy requirement, your total energy expenditure, And how this whole thing about the obesogenics, what can you do anyway? Well, first off is eating. Even small changes can make a huge difference. Because one thing that they've shown in various studies over and over is the majority of individuals that lose weight and keep the weight off modify their diets and their exercise activity. Doesn't mean you have to go full blown and always have this massive diet, but maybe transition more from the empty calories to the more wholesome calories. So eating more whole vegetables, mix it up. Make sure there's dark leafy greens in there. Make sure you have the veggies that are also orange and reds. Make sure you have your legumes in there. So things like peas, beans. You want some of your starchy vegetables as well. And even some of the other mixtures in there. There's some things that just fall into other categories. But mix it up. Have a variety of vegetables. Eat your whole fruits. By mixing up the fruits, look at the colors. Make sure you have some different colors here and there. Don't always eat the same exact fruit every day. Make sure you're getting grains. At least half of them should be whole grains. Looking into low-fat or non-fat dairy, because that's helping reduce the amount of fat intake versus the nutrient intake. Lean proteins. You're looking at getting seafood in there. You're looking at poultry like turkey and chicken. People say, well, what about red meats? Well, the problem is the fat usually mixed in. Now, ground beef, 95, 97% fat-free, can help out. But a lot of times you hear that, well, that ruins the taste. Unfortunately, that's where it is. Fat has a taste to it. There's no way around that. So, but mix in occasionally then, just not every day. Looking at also eggs, nuts. But even make sure you have a mixture of oils in your diet, because your body needs some healthy fats. Doesn't mean pour oil over everything, but make sure it's part of the mixture. What you want to try to reduce and keep in lower amounts are the saturated and the trans fats. Reduce the amount of added sugars. Believe me, there's enough sugar in the foods we're eating already. And the amount of sodium. One of the easiest ways to reduce the amount of sodiums is going to be dealing with the fact of trying to have self-prepared foods, not foods you buy out being prepared. Exercise-wise, any exercise is great. So get out there and just get moving, even walking, just something simple, 5 minutes, perfect. But if you want to have increased benefits, 2.5 hours a week of moderate exercise, 1 hour, 15 minutes a week of aggressive exercise or vigorous exercise. If you want even more benefits, double those. 5 hours a week of moderate, 2.5 hours of vigorous exercise. If you're saying, well, what's moderate, what's vigorous? Now, we got some examples here, but the idea is moderate, you can carry on conversation during. Vigorous, you can say a couple words and then you got to catch your breath. So it's kind of balancing out. So moderate, you can carry conversation, but not necessarily sing. Vigorous, couple words, catch your breath, couple words, catch your breath. The biggest thing is, though, small changes. Start with once a week for 20 minutes or 10 minutes even. You can build things up as you go. Small changes make a difference. Small changes are also easier to accomplish. So that's weight management. Until the next video.